Do you ever just want to hear a story that proves that, yes, breastfeeding can work out just the way we want it to? And yes, we can set ourselves up for success to have the postpartum experience that we're hoping for. This week's guest really has a story like that. Did everything go perfectly according to plan? No. Did how she think things were going to look while she was pregnant and planning look exactly like they looked when she was in the experience? No, but this week's guest really set herself up for success by doing things like hiring a night nurse to help her with her twins. And then she later had a singleton when her twins were just 18 months old, if you can believe that. And she talks about that just at the very end. But I'm so happy to share this story from someone who really did have a pretty smooth experience, given that she gave birth to twins and was able to feed them from her body in the way that she wanted. So sit back, relax, and hear this story of triumph from Kanika, the host of That's Total Mom Sense. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. Having known only a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore the systemic, medical, and cultural barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that you know your baby feeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are.
So my name's Kanika Chadda Gupta. I'm based in New Jersey. I have 3 kids, including twins under 6. And I have a background in journalism, so was a television anchor for CNN, and then switched gears and launched my podcast, and it's called That's Total Mom Sense.
I don't know if it's in your most recent intro to your podcast, but at least in the older ones, because I've been going back through your older episodes.
The archives.
Yeah, you say, if I had a dime for every time somebody said, you've got your hands full,
Yeah.
which so many of us get told,
Yes.
when we're busy working parents, which
Yeah.
all of us are busy working parents, whether or not we work outside of the home,
Right.
because taking care of children in and of itself is work. Whether or not we do paid work, is beside the point. So I would love to take you back to long before you had children.
Okay.
And take you back to growing up and have you think about what your exposure to baby feeding was before it was your turn, and tell me some of your earliest memories of baby feeding, and if you ever did see people feeding babies from their own bodies and what that was like.
Oh, wow. I love this. Yeah. So I do have a photographic memory, but
Wow.
it dates back to when I was about 5 or 6. Don't remember my personal feeding days, but I do vividly remember my sister. She's about 7 years younger than me. And so that was the first time I witnessed my mom feeding her. And then I bottle fed her too. I feel like I was very much an adult child. And because I prayed so hard to have this sibling and my only sister, I was actively involved in her rearing. So it was like changing diapers or preparing her bottle, testing it on my wrist. I learned how to do that when I was like 7, 8 years old.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. And so was your sister all bottle fed with formula, or did your mom do any breastfeeding at all?
Yeah, she did. She did. So it was like half and half. And I don't remember there being a pump back then, or at least my mom didn't have one. And so I never saw that contraption in my
Mm.
life until
Right?
I needed to use it. But yeah, I do remember that there was the formula and the baby food, and my mom nursed her too.
Yes. And I've heard you mention in some of your podcasts that your family took trips to India every year.
That's right. India was very much a second home to me. And since I was born in Bombay, my parents immigrated with me when I was 2.
Mm.
So I feel like when you are an immigrant to the US, you have a completely different perspective than my sister who's first generation and my kids who are too. But yeah, we visited every summer. I stayed with my grandmother and my aunt who lived in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai. And it's one of the most magnificent metropolises in the world. It's just this rush of the senses as soon as you land.
That's amazing. And so when you visited when you were young, which was Bombay at the time, do you
Mhm.
remember ever seeing as a child, or even do you still visit now as an
Yeah.
adult? Do
I
you
haven't taken my kids. I got to experience the city in adulthood because when I worked for CNN, I was stationed in India. And
Oh, amazing.
yeah, life just came full circle. It was after I did my undergrad and did my master's in broadcast journalism that I had this opportunity that sent me back there. And it was incredible. I got a chance to cover the gamut of events from the 26/11 terror attacks, which happened
Mm,
it was had a month into working when that happened.
mm.
And we were covering it from the newsroom and the front lines. And then even the Slumdog Millionaire Oscar win was a
Oh,
hoopla in itself, much like the Natu song winning Best Music Composition this year. And yeah, I feel like I really understood the working culture, and I can read and write Hindi, and I used it daily. As much as everyone, most citizens are educated and can speak English to you, when you can communicate in the native language, like, you can get shit done. You
of course,
know?
it opens you up to a whole
Yes.
new aspect of living in any place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then as you were there both as a child and an adult, did you notice anything about the culture of baby feeding? Did you see people openly feeding babies with their bodies, breastfeeding, or did you mostly see bottle feeding?
Yeah, I mostly saw bottle feeding, and I think this comes down to this almost cultural philosophy of shame.
Mm.
And it should not be this way, but I think it's shameful to expose your body, and everything is about modesty and covering up. And we just never really saw that in public, where, a mother is feeding her child. It just, yeah, I didn't see. Now I have to go back and pay closer attention, whether there are lactation rooms or pumping stations or anything like that. But I think because it wasn't in the cultural fabric to have it at all, most people just relegated to bottle feeding. And even in my own experience, I resent the fact that in those times, I was born in the 80s, moms and the mass junta were duped. They were told that formula is actually better than breast milk.
Mhm. Mm.
And it was just this whole marketing ploy. But I think because it's this completely different, again, culture, society, India would take a lot of opportunity to like mimic the West as much as they could. And so if something is coming from America, whether it's a Similac or an Infamil or whatever, they're like, sign us up because that's what the Americans are doing, and that's the land of golden opportunity, and we'll have what they're having. And it almost took a step back, and from my grandmother's generation, where everything was made from scratch, and there was an embracing of all things natural. So there's breastfeeding and truly eating farm to table, the grains and the lentils, like everything homegrown, churning their own butter, having a milkman come to your house with glass bottles of milk. We still had that every morning. Like you'd get woken up by someone rapping at your door because the milk bottles needed to be switched out. That's the culture they came from and the paradigm they came from. But then in my mom's time after the 70s, it was just like things can be packaged and live on a shelf for a year. And maybe the formulas are fortified with more vitamins and nutrients that we ourselves can provide. So let's give them this. So yeah, but now I know that there's a shift because we're far more aware of what the benefits are.
Yeah, and this is not unique to India. This happened all across the world, including in the United States.
Mm.
And the reason I ask my guests to go back into their memories of childhood is because this is one of the reasons why, even if we have a story that's like, yes, I met my goals when it came to feeding my babies, most of us still struggled to some extent to feed our babies. And the reason we struggled is because we were not surrounded by people feeding their babies from their bodies from our earliest moments because of exactly what you're talking about. It was
Yes.
basically ripped from us culturally.
Yeah,
And those of us who are choosing to feed our babies with our bodies are rebuilding this as a cultural paradigm. And
exactly.
so it's much harder for us than it was for our grandparents or our great grandparents because for them it was passed down from generation to generation. And now we're rebuilding something that was lost.
100%. And I think at that time you didn't want to question
Hmm.
if this is the norm and if this is what's being advertised and even my doctor is recommending
Right.
this, who am I to challenge that? Yeah, so my mom like barely breastfed me. She was
Hmm.
like, I'm supposed to give you the formula. It was better for you, is what we were
Yeah.
told.
Yeah. So then you find out you're pregnant with twins.
Yes.
And did you know immediately that you wanted to breastfeed?
I did. And I have to give kudos to my husband who just did all this research. We wanted to know everything we could about rearing a newborn and an infant. And then because we were expecting twins, it was like all the more we got to get this down to a science and have a system in place. And it was through just all these articles that we read about. I knew about the La Leche League like before I had them. I knew that, okay, this exists and I'm going to want to have a support system when I'm on my own feeding journey, whatever that looks like. And we were amazed by the benefits, the inherent benefits of breastfeeding, from how it helps with their respiratory development and brain function and like everything, their nutrition, and knowing when they're full, having that synapse go off that I'm full. Like a newborn can do that when they're nursing. We were just totally like in awe when we found out about that, and I thought, this, I have to be able to do this.
Yeah. And did you, as you were researching prenatally, did you find any twin specific resources that you knew you were going to rely on when it came to breastfeeding specifically?
Yeah, there was a book called What to Do When You're Expecting Two. And I believe that's the title. So that was helpful. And that got into really the granular on what you need to buy two of, what don't you, like all the baby paraphernalia and gear and stuff. And it touched on nursing as well. But I feel like I learned the most from really just a tribe of women around me, the nurses at St. Barnabas in New Jersey, where I delivered, the NICU staff and nurses who helped with my babies when they were born. And then I had a lactation consultant and a baby nurse as soon as we came home with them. So I had all of these advisors. And I think that was so important because I wanted to be invested and nurse them the best that I was capable. And I did it. And I think like I still remember the first day though, I had a C-section and it was not planned. I actually my water broke at 3 in the morning one evening, and my husband happened to be away on travel,
Oh,
which,
no.
like, I know never really happens. Like, he didn't really travel that much for work. It might have been just, like, 3 times a year, and because I was due in February, January 24th, one, like, winter morning, middle of the night, it was like January travel, yes, go ahead. Go ahead to Seattle and it's all
Oh, so he
good.
was really far away
He was
too.
far. He was
Yeah.
far. So then when it happened, it was just like insert expletive. Like this
Right.
is happening right now, and he had just landed. He was just like checking into his hotel and everything. And he was like, "All right, I'll take the first flight out." And that wasn't until the next day. So he got on like a 6 a.m. flight the next day, but I had delivered at 7, I think it was 7:24 and 7:26. So my in-laws took me to the hospital. My sister, who was my first experience of a baby in my life, she was my right-hand person and she scrubbed in. And so she's the first person to see
Wow.
her niece and nephew.
How many
Yeah.
weeks in were you? What was your gestation?
Yes. Yeah, I was 35 weeks and 4 days. I think it was 35 4 or 35 6. Yeah. And so the goal was to get to 38. That is when an OB would advise that we can schedule a C-section for, and then full term for a singleton is 40 weeks. And so I wanted to get to that 38, but it unfolded this way. And they did have a NICU experience for a week. And so even that it was hard because I I remember even like the movies that you watch when you're a kid that there's like a nursery and they're all bundled up and then their name is right outside their little like bassinet thing, and we didn't have that at all. There was like tubes and isolates and having to go in to, luckily we had a little room that they blocked off for both the twins. So it was like a private space, just happened by chance. And we'd go into that room where I would nurse them and do skin to skin, and then I'd have to leave the room and go back to my hospital room where I was
Mm.
alone. So that was jarring. I didn't fully expect that. And then I remember really wanting to be able to feed them with my milk right off the bat. And so I like squeezed and expressed the colostrum out, which it took a day to actually have that letdown, but till my boobs were like black and blue. I was like,
Mm.
I need this to happen because I think with C-sections also, the body is shocked into this whole new reason for being and milk production that it takes a little bit for the body to understand that it's okay, we're going to have to switch gears and do this now. And yeah, I was so like ready for it and wanted to force it. I need this colostrum. I need to let this let down. And I would just sit in my hospital room with the hospital grade pump on. I was like revving up an engine. I was like, let it just, like, when is this going to happen? Let's get the show on the road.
Low here, real fast. Are you in that mode where you are trying to get that engine to rev and you're feeling nervous and you want your milk to flow and it's just not flowing for some reason? I don't want you in a position where you are making your breast black and blue like Kanika did. She was doing the best she could in that moment, but I would love to be the person who is by your side, who is trained as an internationally board certified lactation consultant to help you do this with as much ease and grace as possible to get through the hardest times of breastfeeding. So reach out to me, www.quabbinbirthservices.com. In most cases, I can bill your insurance so that you don't even have to pay out of pocket for the services I provide. Can't wait to talk to you.
Yeah, I know so many people can relate to that feeling. You're just wait. It's like watching a pot boil. Like
Yes.
you're just waiting for it to happen and it's not happening.
Yeah.
And then the more you want it to happen, it's almost like that stress of it wanting to happen almost makes it harder for your body just to let go and release the milk.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's definitely not a good combination. But then eventually, like when I did produce that colostrum, I was like crying happy tears. I was like, oh my God,
Mm.
like this vial, this is what they need right now. And it was just like, yes, you did it. There's a celebration going on with whichever nurse was on shift that I had befriended. And then after that, thanks to having that hospital grade pump on throughout the day, it helped. And I got them to latch when I was in that room one on one with them. And even that, it was a little bit of a struggle. My daughter would fall asleep, and she didn't have the energy to like keep going. And so just to be able to nudge her awake and tickle her cheek and like all those tactics that like you get to know again having these nurses around you and like just guiding you through it. Eventually she did and they both were discharged and then at home I got on a very regimented feeding schedule, which was great. I wanted them to be able to be fed at the same time. And I had them both like in football hold with this twin Z pillow. It's like this
Mm.
huge, oh my gosh, I've saved it because I want them to look back on the photos when they could like be perched on there. And when they
Yes.
do become teenagers, yeah, you fit in that little nook right there, both of you side by side. But yeah, I fed them in that and would do as many feedings simultaneously like that for 4 months. And then they got a little too big, and then I had to do one by one.
Okay. Okay. So for the first 4 months, you were tandem feeding them in the
Yes.
football holds.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
And then I
want
would switch. That's another trick. I had no idea. I was like, okay, I guess they're both emptied and we're done with this feeding. And my lactation consultant was like, no, actually, you should still switch because the way that each one latches and the milk ducts all the way at the back, you don't know if they got it all. And then it
Mhm.
evens it out and makes sure you're not lopsided and whatever it is. But yeah, just because you have two feeding at the same time doesn't mean like you're
You've
done. You still
completely
switch.
drained. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to go back a little bit to that first week. It was a week that they were in the NICU.
Yeah.
Okay, so in those first couple of days when you were first getting set up with your pump and everything, did the did you get sized for your phalanges in the hospital? Did anyone do that for you?
Yes, I did. There was a lactation consultant on site, so she was different from who I had come to my home after. But yeah, and there was even a breastfeeding class that I like hobbled down the hall and sat
Oh,
and
I heard
took
you
for.
say that in one of your episodes
Yeah.
on your
Oh,
podcast.
yes, it was great. I'm so glad they
Yeah.
had that. And
Uh-huh.
it was just this afternoon class, and I was at the hospital for 4 days and 3 nights, and so, yeah, I was there and available to take that class, and I met with that consultant one-on-one after. But yeah, she did size me and had to, like she's like, "Oh, I think we have some that are your size at the back," because what I had ordered in advance, I had the Medela pump, wasn't my size. And it's great that they had a whole like pantry of things on hand. And then I had the pumping bra already. And I love that hospital grade pump, I have to say, because it was so heavy duty. And I rented one and I had that for about a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you have twins and you're
Mhm.
going to continue pumping once you
Right.
leave.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. And
Mhm.
then the other thing I wanted to know about was once you were in your room and you were pumping, did that lactation consultant walk you through how do you use the pump? What are the settings for it so that you weren't, or a nurse, did they really show you how to use it so that you weren't just lost in space figuring out on your own?
Yes,
Okay.
I was guided through that, and I even took video on my phone because I wanted to be able to reference it later, have my husband know too, just in case
Yeah.
anything. And that was great because I'm one to ask a ton of questions, and I'm really inquisitive and curious, and so I wanted to have everything answered. Even just something like with the settings, I was like, shouldn't I just turn it all the way up and
Mm,
have it be
mhm.
like triple time? Is that how we can do it and be efficient? And they were like, no,
Right, yeah.
you're going to be in pain. And the idea is not to like squeeze it out so that you're like squirming and writhing in pain. That's not the point. There's a certain, I don't know, like a fluidity to the letdown. And once it has its own rhythm, you'll feel that like this is comfortable and the bottles are filling up at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I tell a lot of my clients that once we become parents, we think I will sacrifice anything, including my own comfort, for my baby. And so if I need to be in pain while I'm pumping, I'll do that. However, that is not actually helpful because when your
Right.
pain hormones are releasing, that interferes with your milk releasing hormones. So if your pain hormones are releasing, your milk releasing hormones will not release. They come from the same pituitary gland. And so,
Interesting.
yeah, so if you're in pain, that's actually going to be counterproductive
Right,
to
right.
allowing your body to release the milk. The milk will still be there. That's why sometimes you'll feel the milk and you'll think, why isn't the milk releasing? So if you have a poor latch,
Yes.
and you're in pain or you have nipple damage, or if your pump is painful, either because the phalange size isn't right or because you're using the settings improperly, and so it's causing pain, then the milk won't release, even if you feel full and you feel milk
Yeah.
there.
Ah, that makes so much sense. I love that you shared that. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, so it's really important for the parent to be comfortable too,
Mm,
even though we will sacrifice so much for our babies.
right.
Yeah, so you end up going home, and after about 5 days, you said,
Yeah.
and you hired a lactation consultant. Was it right away, or you waited a little while to see if you needed somebody at home?
Yeah, it was right away. I was making a ton of calls while I was at the hospital because luckily for me, my neighbor had delivered just a few months before that. She had a 6-month-old. And so when it came to lactation consultant, tongue tie, pediatrician, she filled me in on everything. And so already had this knowing of what I needed. And I had another really close friend who recommended this baby nurse, and she already had her for two of her kids. And so I thought, yes, that's something that we'll invest in as well because we have twins. And the fact that like we are going to have to get so skilled at swaddling, putting them down. And I'd already read Happiest Baby on the Block and knew the 5 S's and all of that, but I still felt like I want to have someone who is just an expert in this space to instruct me and my husband because
Mhm.
we're going to have to tag team. And it's like when she's gone and the training wheels are off, like we'll have to do this.
Yeah, and were you still working as a journalist when you had your twins?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I had a digital marketing firm at that time, and I feel it was from 2015 onwards that I was really tapping into my entrepreneurial pursuits. And so it was called Chronology Agency, and it was newly launched. I had the twins in Jan 2017, Jan 2017. And so I had a pretty robust portfolio of clients, about like 30 or 40 clients at the time. And I was still working. And so I think that was its own juggle because I didn't want to give myself a mat leave. Because when we think working from home, and that's something that's so like commonplace now in this post-COVID world that we're living in. I was working from home before then. Like I could get a referral and talk to a client on the phone and take them through something on a Zoom and then see their website and web development through fruition with my team. I wanted to still be able to do that and allow myself to, of course, I have the babies at home and I'm nursing them and recuperating, but I can still squeeze in some calls and deadlines and work and have things be autopilot with my team. Yeah, I worked throughout. I didn't take any mat leave.
And did that work out how you expected, or did it end up being harder than you expected?
It was so much harder.
Mhm.
So much harder. When people say that, oh, how lucky you have your own schedule and you're working from home and you have all this flexibility. But it's also just that adage that, like, you eat what you kill kind of thing.
Mhm.
And if I wasn't prospecting for clients or if I didn't have any clients in the pipeline, then I didn't have anything. And I didn't
Mhm.
want to go 6 months where I didn't have that income coming in. And so I just kept it going. I did dial it back and knew what my capacity was. So at least I gave myself that grace. But yeah, there's something so like in your face about how after you give birth and your body really needs to rest and rebuild, like doing anything outside of that is going to take away from the energy that it should be channeling on that healing.
Yeah, and
And I
creating milk for 2 people is
exactly.
very, energy draining. Yeah.
Yes, but I was just this energizer bunny, and I was like, "I'm just gonna figure it out, and I'll do it." And I did have my schedule, and we did a nanny who helped us. And so after the baby nurse, we had a nanny who worked with us, and that was for a good like year and a half. And even that, I'm just very fortunate to have that because the night feeds, like I would feed one baby and it would just alternate. I didn't know who I was going to get at the midnight hour and 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So it was basically every 3 hours.
Mm,
That was the rhythm, I would say, especially when they were like, I want to say 3 to 4 months on till a year.
mm.
And so yeah, I'm glad that she was able to do one of those 3 a.m. feeds, and then the midnight ones or the 6 a.m., my husband would help out, and that way, the kids were getting the nourishment they needed, and we got our sleep in spurts. We all worked around
Yeah, that sounds really challenging. I
that.
think when we're in the prenatal phase and we are planning or dreaming what our lives are going to be like once we have the babies, we create this picture perfect plan.
Yeah, yeah,
And then when the babies are actually there and we're living it, we think, yeah, this is the plan that I created. However, it feels very different in real life than what it looked like on paper.
exactly. It's so true, and I think for anyone who goes through a twin pregnancy and twin birth and twin feeding schedule, like you learn so much about being efficient, and then eventually like I learned to giving myself time to rest and not being go. I remember like just to keep my production up, I would pump in between. I'd have my laptop in my lap, but I would pump when they were sleeping. No, they had just finished a feed because I wanted my body to be shocked into thinking it needed to overproduce.
Mm.
And so I was just either attached to a baby or a pump like around the clock. And then I'd have Felicity on in the background, which was nice.
Yeah. I heard you mention that on another
Yeah.
podcast, and I love to ask people, "What was your show that you binged while nursing?"
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that it was on Netflix, and I was like, oh my gosh, starting from season one, she gets
Yeah.
into NYU, and it was the cutest thing. And even my nanny was so into it. And she was like, I don't understand. There's like Ben and Noel, and this girl can't decide. I was like, I know. She's really confused. I don't know which one I like either. I don't know which one I want her to end up with. Yeah, yeah, it was really cute. So I feel like there was still those moments that like the babies' bellies were full. We had the schedule down, and it just looks like this feels like this distant memory when I look back on it now.
Yeah. I love too that you mention all the people you brought in to support you because sometimes we feel like it has to be us all the time.
Yeah.
But humans actually, we evolved in these large groups where there were allo mothers, people fed each other's babies. And now we're so isolated and we think that the baby or the children have to rely only on us. And that's really not how humans lived historically and anthropologically speaking. And
Yes.
I know not everybody can do that. Not everybody can hire outside help.
Hmm.
However, there are ways to do it. There are baby registries now. Be Her Village. I had the founder of Be Her Village on, and then you
Hmm.
can have baby registries where instead of buying stuff, because actually you don't need that much stuff when you have a baby, you
No.
can have people hire the night nannies, the postpartum doula support, the things that actually are going to help keep you sane as opposed to getting all the stuff that your baby may or may not need. and just wait and see, and then get that stuff secondhand if you need it.
Exactly, exactly.
And
And
really
most of
get
the
the
stuff only
support you
stays
need.
around for 3 months.
I know.
So you just have all this paraphernalia at the end. You're like, what are you gonna do with it? So I knew that going into. I was like, we're only gonna get what we absolutely need, and if there are things that we can just buy one of, they have to share.
Exactly. Your twins were 18 months when you uh, became pregnant or had your second?
Yes, they were. Yeah, I had my third
Or
when
your
they were
third, yeah.
18 months. Yeah,
Wow.
I know. Nursing is not birth control. That's my PSA for that. But yeah, no, what had happened was, when the twins were 9 months, that's when I got pregnant again, was totally surprised, was not expecting. It takes just one time.
Yeah.
But my daughter, in fact, like this was around 10 months, she started repelling me and not wanting to nurse.
Mhm.
And I actually had gone into the OB around that time because I wanted to confirm, like I felt that I might be pregnant. I was like, I need to go in, do the blood work and be sure about it. And she kind of educated me and said, like, the milk tastes different. It might taste different or smell a little different. Something is changing in your body that she doesn't like it anymore. And I was like, oh wow, that's so interesting. My son was cool with it, but not so much my daughter. And then eventually, so like around the year mark, like that's when the nursing stopped for the twins. And then my baby bump was growing with the third. And then I nursed him for about a year too.
Okay.
Mhm.
Awesome. I wish we could have heard more about that story, but I was so happy to hear about your twin story. And maybe we'll have you back sometime to hear what it was like nursing a little tiny baby with basically tiny toddlers. They were babies themselves running
Yeah.
around. But before we close out, I would love to hear more about that's total mom sense and some of the lessons you've learned from some of the amazing people you've had on your show to interview, like Chelsea Clinton. So, if you want to share with my listeners what they might gain from listening to your show, I would love to hear more about it.
Thank you, Lo. Yeah, absolutely. That Total Mom Sense was born after I was looking for a podcast that felt inspiring and illuminating to me as a parent. And I invite public figures and thought leaders across industries by design because we don't know enough about their parenting journey. We might know that they were the success story in politics or finance or beauty, but we don't know their own lived experience as a parent. And I think that's something instantly relatable when you find another parent to talk to. You're just like, oh my God, tell me everything. How old are your kids? And it's great to be able to have that dialogue with them and then have them share their life lessons because it's usually the teachings and some sort of adversity that got us to where we are, and you want to be able to impart that to the next generation in a really profound way that leaves its imprint. And so I always ask them now, how are they doing that, especially from their vantage point? And so I'll share some of the nuggets. Rebecca Minkoff shared that she was just 8 years old when her mom refused to buy a dress for her. She wanted a new dress for school. There was a function at school, and her mom was just stuck to her guns and was, you don't have enough in your allowance. And they had to earn their keep through the chores they did
Mm,
at home. And so she said, I can take you to the fabric store and I'll teach you how to sew.
mm,
And so by 9, Rebecca's like sewing her entire wardrobe.
mm,
And this fashion wasn't just this fleeting interest for her. It was something that her mom helped cultivate in her childhood. And that's why when she graduated from high school, she moved straight to New York from San Diego and started working in the fashion business and started her own label shortly after that. So that's not by coincidence. That was a life lesson that she learned. And it's so incredible that impact it can have from your childhood. And so kudos to Rebecca's mom
I
for
know. And
doing
there's so
that.
many stories like that from guests on your
Yes.
podcast. Yeah, where you think,
Yes.
just that one moment changed the trajectory of her life, and now she's this amazing public figure who is
Yeah.
changing the course of so many people's lives. Yeah.
Exactly. And Chelsea Clinton, as you mentioned, same thing. She was an only child living in a fishbowl because from age 12 to 20, she was at the White House. And so we all knew her as this first daughter and knew her every move. And she was just such a driven, directed kid. Like her parents didn't have to tell her, go practice music or go get your homework done. She wanted to do all those things. It was, in fact, her mom that was like, you got to lighten up. Like, you're allowed to have a sleepover. It's fine. Yes, there's Secret Service and all of that, but like, you can have your friends over. And I think that she brings another perspective as she's raising her 3 kids. And she was an only child. And so now here she has 3. And she wrote a book called Welcome to the Big Kids Club,
Mm,
where she talked about what it's like being a sibling.
mm,
And so interesting that like she never had that, but she wanted to be so plugged in to how her first kid and her second kid was feeling when the
mm,
sibling came along. So
mm.
yeah, everyone has some wisdom to share, and I love bringing it out in my guests.
Yes, yeah. Your guests have so many fascinating things to share. So, thank you so much for your podcast and for bringing on so many interesting people and bringing out an interesting perspective that they have to share, not just the same thing that they share on every other podcast.
Yeah. Thank you. And you're doing the same thing, Lo. I love how you carry this show, and it's so nuanced, and it's something that resonates with all parents and mothers who know that they want to have a very special like feeding experience. So congrats to you.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Awesome. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So many of us hear those horror stories when we're pregnant of how breastfeeding failed or was horrible or didn't go the way we expected. And it's so nice to hear a story of somebody feeding twins and having some bumps in the road, but it going the way that she wanted it to. And that was with some intentionality. You can hear all throughout the way she got the support she needed. She asked for help in the hospital. She hired lactation consultants to come to the house. She hired the people she needed. And as I mentioned throughout the show, we sometimes reject the support that we need because we make excuses and we say we can't afford that support. But sometimes we can't afford not to find a way to get the support. And I say that knowing that all of us are doing the best job we can with the information and the resources that we have. But I think sometimes we can get a little bit creative, like finding baby registries like Be Her Village that can help us ask for the support we need from other people. And just being a little bit more willing to be vulnerable with other people, because in the end, it really isn't the stuff that's going to help us feel okay in the postpartum period and to feed our babies. But it's going to be the people that we surround ourselves with. So whether you need that support from a lactation consultant like me, I would love to be that person, or you need that support from communities like the Milk Making Minutes, my community of people who talk about why baby feeding is so challenging. This is a place where both professionals and parents who have fed babies from their bodies come together to discuss the inequities that exist, the barriers that are there, so that we can improve the situation for those coming behind us and make real change. I would love for you to join that group and lend your voice to help us understand these inequities a little bit better so that professionals and parents can come together and think about all of these oddities, both culturally and medically, that exist to make baby feeding so difficult. So join the group. I'd love to see your name pop up and you can introduce yourself. You can post in that group about interesting barriers that you've noticed along the way. And with that, I'll see you soon. Bye.